Hi, guys, and welcome to the final Next Africa Edition session. You guys have stuck with us, so we are so excited for everything that we have in store for today. Honestly, this might be like the craziest one yet, so I'll just get it going really quick. But before we get into that, I want to encourage you to go over to your student dashboard and catch up on any of the sessions you missed. You do not want to miss out. This is good stuff. Okay, our lovely partner, who you guys are very familiar with, Abrima from Studio 189, is here with us. So let's bring her on stage.
Hi, everybody.
Hi,
Hi, Adiola.
happy to have you. I'm going to turn the stage over to you. You can briefly reintroduce yourself like you've done for us before, but then after that, bring on our special guest.
Great. Well, hi, everybody. Hi to all the students. It's great to see everybody again. I'm so glad that have spent all these days with all these incredible people. I'm really excited about this next panel, my conversations with Virgil Abloh. So I'm going to bring him up to the stage. I think we all know him. Wonderful person.
Hey, what's going on?
How are you?
Good, no complaints.
Cool. So I'm actually really excited about this conversation. I think this is going to be good. So to start with, I know everyone knows who you are, but just in case, do you want to do a brief intro of who you are?
Yeah, my name is Virgil Abloh. I'm the son of two Ghanaian parents. I have a label called Off-White, as well as I work for Louis Vuitton, and those are just a few things that sort of describe what I do on a day-to-day basis. But yeah.
Fantastic. So I'm going to give a slightly long intro, but the reason why I think this conversation is exciting, and also the conversations we've had, I think, since the pandemic began and at the height of the BLM movement, a lot of it is tied to conversations around Pan-Africanism, which is also why I thought that Endeavor Impact making this decision to do this was really interesting, figuring out how to connect the dots between what's going on the continent and its diaspora. And I know we talked a bit about, this type of conversation, a lot about, conversations in the 60s, a lot of people, we're both Ghanaian.
Yeah, exactly.
And a lot of people don't realize that, Ghana is the first country to get independence from colonialism, which is a huge thing. And that there was a close relationship between, Ghana being the first country and then the trickle down that happened across the continent with people's fight for freedom, but also what happened in the United States in the civil rights movement, and that there's a connectivity between what happened in the United States and what happened in West Africa and Ghana, and that Martin Luther King was in 1957 in March in Ghana when the British were leaving.
Yeah.
And so a lot of that I just think is really interesting, because a lot of those movements that happened that kind of, I guess, put us in a position to be able to have this kind of conversation online, seem to have kind of really taken a next push, in 2020. A lot of changes happened. So I just wanted to get vibe a little bit about what are your thoughts on Pan-Africanism and where you saw yourself in 2020 and what you saw happening in the world?
No, yeah, and I have a lot of spirited thoughts on that exact topic, and I'm glad you prefaced it with history, right? Like us having this conversation on the internet, in 2021 means that hey, our generation's been fused with the internet. It's been fused with this powerful tool sitting in front of us that almost seems like a sci-fi tool that previous histories didn't have. But what the stark reminder of 2020 is that no matter what tools we have today, it doesn't delink us from the past, how we got there. And I think 2020 was a reckoning with, 400 plus years of inequality and sort of, contextualization about Africa and the rest of the world and its diaspora and African Americans, et cetera. So centering the conversation here is great because, we're both Ghanaian. We're both from this country that's very, as you stated, is very specific history in a whole continent. And we're the youth of today, like we're both professionals today that part of our work is our DNA. And so to me, conversations around what's happening in Africa today are as important as all the different sort of untangling that needs to happen as, like we as Black people are awarded, the same opportunities given to others in this world. So it's all centering the conversation as I see it.
I agree. And it's all super interconnected. And, I remember in the summer when we were having these conversations and Victor started In the Black, an organization to support Black creatives in the fashion industry and get people to, work together. And everything was happening with the looting and BLM. And I brought up this topic about, the importance of participating in the election. And you immediately were like, I'm down, I'm helping. So easily and so beautifully. And you took the charge so quickly. I remember that it encouraged me to want to really push further. Do you know what I mean? And since I've seen you do that for so many people, I always feel like in life, there's all these kind of ninjas that do things that people don't know. and how critical it is, because it operates with intention, right? Like you made these choices to do this. And I don't know if you don't mind talking a bit about the work you've been doing to push the conversation forward, your project with Achimota, which I think is super badass, what you're doing at State Park, maybe starting with whichever one of these projects you would like to start.
Well, a part of my personality, this is my work ethic in a way, is like, I want to see change. And I want to see it so much. I want to see it now, and I think obviously so many people are like, well, you have to get the LLC and you have to buy the domain name and you have to like register this, or in order for you to do this or that. And like, I simply just don't accept that, because like when we partnered up, like the election was urgent.
That's right.
That's something we want. It's not something that we're going to do tomorrow. Like if we don't do the work in this next 6 hours, that means the work in the next 6 hours isn't going to happen. And look at where we are today. We have an administration that I can breathe, at least, through the hard work of all those that rallied around the topic, not just us. When it's the same thing as like contextualizing Africa, right? Like I have a number of friends here that don't even I have friends that don't recognize where I'm from. They don't understand it. They don't know where it is. They know of it. And that to me is something that we can change in our lifetime. We're doing that by this conversation. But when we embed it in our work, like if you embed it in Studio 189, I embed it within Off-White. If people know Studio 189, they know Off-White, then the door is already open to educate people about what Ghana is, where it's from, what are the traditions of it, and just give a little bit of color to Africa. And so I do that with different partnerships, it's basically being supportive. I don't want to make it seem anything extra, like if I find a project that is compelling and I feel like I can add something to, and better yet, use my resources to make it happen, like I'll do that. So I was a skater since I grew up, skateboard culture sort of opened my eyes to the world more than fashion or art or design. So I'm working with Surf Ghana, Sandy, who's like been developing this for years, like the idea of supporting the skate infrastructure in Ghana. And then to support that is working with Daily Paper, and they're, they have a body of work, and it's just kind of unity can go a long way. And so that takes care of that ecosystem. But as well, I'm working with different models, different musicians. And to me, it's all under this like whole umbrella of just like product of Africa, I'm calling it. Like I'm a product of Africa. Off-White is a product of Africa. People might not know that, but like, hey, I'm from Ghana. This is an African fashion house. Like, and in sort of not just saying that, but also doing the work is important to me. So that's just like, it's not just one or two. I'm trying to think of like 6 or 8 projects. The Achimota School is a school that my mom always used to talk about when I would go to Accra, and talking about who went there and what it meant. And so for me to mentor and build that bridge is also important. It's not just like transactional.
And who tell us about Achimota School? Like, who did go there, and where is, like, tell us a bit more about it.
Yeah, I have family members. Like, for me, it was super personal. Like, my mom grew up like in the center of Accra near Mokala Market, and my dad is from Tema. So imagine when I'm like 14 going to Ghana for the first time, when I'm able to remember. I remember like sitting in the taxi and then pointing out to all these monuments. Like my first memory is of that. And then like my mom was, Jamthi Brothers was like where she learned how to sew. And so she would talk about like her classmates going to different schools, and my aunts and uncles and her cousins and etc. So imagine when I'm that young and I remember these names, I remember these places, I remember the sights and sounds. So it's just full circle for me to be able to be an adult and do things that relate to my parents' community that they never, they just came to Chicago and had me and my sister. So that's like almost, I feel like I'm finally repaying the gratitude for them giving me the opportunity by doing things locally that resonate with where they came from and how they grew up.
And that is also something I really love, that idea of paying it forward and letting it come a bit full circle, like opening the doors where doors are not typically open. Is way more powerful than I think people really get. Just as another like example of something work that you've done that I find to be incredibly fascinating is the work you're doing with Postmodern, but also the scholarship fund that you've been doing. Because I had a particular incident with one of my students that I won't specifically talk about, but what I will say is that, you don't find that many Black and brown students in certain universities, and you don't find that many professors, frankly speaking, and that many female Black and brown professors in those universities. And the impression that gives eventually impacts that kind of career you get, what kind of jobs you get, who's going to hire you. And it does this whole trickle down. And sometimes, especially in this environment that we're in now, where COVID is so prevalent and people are going through some economic issues, there's no space for someone who has the potential. But through this fund, can you tell us a bit about it? Because it seems like you're creating space for a lot of people.
Yeah, that fundamentally I figured out early in my career, like I'm not a designer for designer's sake. Like it's sort of 2-1 note. I'm not I'm more fulfilled by this idea of like opening doors so that other people can exist in an easier route than I had to. I think that to me, is like socially more interesting. If we champion that idea, like what if that was as trendy as being a fashion designer itself? Then we would definitely see a sort of like, we would see the effects so fast. And so to me, I started the Postmodern Scholarship Fund just to sort of to solve one sort of critical point, was that like getting on this career track is a hurdle unto itself, right? And using my resonance to inspire students at the student level to be on this sort of career path. And to make it, like you said, if you see diversity starting at the beginning of the career path, it's less jaded and it's less like an anomaly as we become a senior, as you go for your first job interview, so I was like, hey, let's make a fund, raise $1 million before announcing it, so that there's a cachet to get Black and brown students in the system. And, I partnered with Fashion Scholarship Fund, which services 80 schools already. So it's not like there's this lag time of like it wasn't so ambitious, right? It was me using the pieces on the table and we've sort of already announced like the first the inaugural season, and so we have a lot more work to do, but I'm proud of it because it's up and running and it's active, and there's students receiving money and mentorship already.
And with that, what do you think? How do you think that this kind of work, and also, what do you think is the future of the fashion? I know it's like a huge question, so I'm trying like not to load it because you can't answer it in 2 minutes. But where I'm going with this is like, I'm curious your thoughts, also with all the exposure you have and all of your experience. Like, what do you think? Where do you think fashion is going, and where do you think Africa can fit within the context of your vision for, I guess, the future of the fashion industry? Does that make sense?
Yeah. No, I think, well, here's the great news that in my research and practice have found out, is that fashion is more democratic, right? It's not like top down. It's not like the trends, the style, the cachet necessarily comes from the big brands, establishment, etc. More than anything, I think it's reverse, that the ecosystem has a say into what is more relevant, what's cool, and what's impactful. So ultimately, you take that and you couple it next to the fact that, and maybe it's just me, maybe I'm biased, but I also can look at things from an objective point of view. I think Africa is experiencing a renaissance in a way from its youthful members, both on the continent and in its diaspora, right? Like me meeting you and hearing your story, I didn't know you before in the Black, and then finding someone who has the same heritage, works in fashion industry, already up and running with your suppliers and producing. It's almost like that's just, you were one of a couple others from friends of friends. It's like I'm like in Ghana working already established companies. And so when I hear that, but then I also see, I'm meeting kids on Instagram who are like a part of the music scene that are like doing projects that are resonating with other friends in London. I feel like, to me, it feels like Ghana and Nigeria are experiencing this like same upswell that I saw in like Brooklyn, or when friends were like, LA is the new whatever, and or whatever, I think. And what I love about that is you take that, there's these resources available, but then also there's a style emerging from Ghana and from Nigeria, whether it's Skepta wearing your hat or WizKid or Rima, like, I love that there's like, hey, we're forming trends and movements, whether it's the music or, I'm very close with Black Coffee and what's happening in South Africa. It's like, there's a world stage for us on its trend-setting style. And if we fan that flame, we're going to see potential just like any other trend that we're a part of.
And how do we move that forward, like after the trend, right? Like, how do we create that foundation so it can have a longer life and it can impact more communities kind of locally so that they can grow? Like my personal mission has always been to see, business grow bigger than aid. So you don't have to rely on foreign independence, which is always weird, international trade relationship with Africa. How do you suppose we can do it so that we can do all the things you just said, but move it past the trend and take ownership, change the narrative? And you know what I'm saying? Like,
well, yeah, I got the answer. The answer is easy in a way. The good thing is the answer is easy in my mind. The only downside is it takes a lot. The answer is all of it at once. Like, it's everything. It's infrastructure, it's media, it's trendsetters, it's songs. Do you know what I mean? It's movement. It's like, it's pure cultural, it's everything. So it has to be hit songs over and over again. You look at like pop music or rap music from Atlanta or Chicago or whatever, or London, like has to be an ecosystem. So what I feel like is there has to be, on all levels, both underground, big business, there needs to be fashion shows, there needs to be labels, there needs to be, like what makes Paris Paris? There's films about Paris, there's Fashion Week about Paris, there's an Eiffel Tower that's about Paris. And we know, those of us from, Africa know those internal, but the more that we can speak about it, the more that we can sort of add color. It's going to take a nation to do it. It's not one person. It's not one entity. It takes vibrant. It takes, it needs to resonate between all of us, and that community needs to keep growing. Then it'll run itself.
Yeah, no, I agree. I also think, which is why I kind of like the Achimota and the skate park project, is, people have to also be willing to make the investment, like the long-term investment.
Yeah.
To build the structure where structures don't, we don't have like a high street here. No, I'm not saying that we need one, but we don't have one, like a shopping district. Talking about fashion, people wouldn't even really know. You'd have to know and discover, which I think is kind of great, and discover the stores, but it's not that easy. Like, you have to kind of know. It's kind of like New York in the 80s or something.
This is me freestyling. It's not a pure answer, but when I go to London and I meet, or I've been to like Lagos during Christmas time, and I'm connecting with kids that live in London and go back and forth. There's such an awesome commuter community too. I know we obviously focus on those living within the continent, and then obviously those that live outside, but I can't tell you the exponential amount more of friends like I have, like you, that go back and forth, right? That are resources, media, and I think that that's a great asset if you look onto it just within itself, of spreading the message, also spending time in both places. Exponential more than I was when I was in my early 20s or whatever. And I think that that's, like you said, like a high street, I want to do a hotel in Ghana. I want to do a boutique hotel that's kind of like the Chiltern Firehouse or whatever. It's got music. It's it's the updated whatever. And I know that if I meet the right people and pull that off, that can probably spur on retail. It can spur on adjacent competitor hotels. And then what do we have at the end is we have the new vibe.
Right. And then, I wanted to ask you, where are your parents from in Ghana?
Yeah, my dad is from Tema and my mom is from Accra, center of Accra.
Nice. And, that, at what point did you realize also, and I feel like you kind of answered it, that you felt the need or the desire to kind of bring your identity even deeper? I'm leading into the last collection you did for LV, basically.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you made a kind of conscious choice. We don't see Kente on the runway often. And also, I've read all kinds of very, very excited, positive, and also, some negative. I've read all kinds of reviews about it, but it definitely made a splash, right? As work does. Can you talk a bit about that decision and what?
Now, the decision was after the tiresome, turbulent year of 2020. I couldn't sit on another Zoom about this exact topic.
Yeah.
Within an industry that's kind of we want to change, but then all the fashion shows are the same, or all the campaigns are sort of the same. To me, it's if the world is set up in a way where it's I love just going on the tangent for a second,
I love this.
Michael, what can we do in our lifetime, right? What is fashion shows? How did I feel when my dad wore Kente cloth to a graduation and I was a teenager being made fun of because everyone's why is your dad wearing that? And I reduced that to, because my African heritage isn't on runways makes people think that it doesn't exist, or it's like it's not as valuable as tartan or plaid or other cultures get to wear and celebrate their culture. Like, why, if it has to be a fashion house, that it has to be devoid of these other places? Like, I am Ghanaian, like my grandmother's in the show notes wearing her Kente cloth. If that's urgent, like if we want to see diversity in fashion, we need to see diversity in fashion. We need to see other cultures celebrated from those people that are of that descent. And that to me was without question. I was like, frankly, I don't want to see this performative part of being, because at the end of the day, like, we can't see who's hired where,
Right.
We don't know. But if you're going to look at a 13-minute Louis Vuitton Virgil collection, that's me on my podium showing the diversity in the industry that I want to see. Like, I would argue that whatever the sort of like logic of if that's what they want to see or not, if the industry behaves like it has in the past, we will get nowhere in all institutions that we exist. George Floyd is murdered under that old regime in broad daylight with a skin tone the same as mine. Like, when I go to work, I'm bringing that message to the front page, and I'm doing it as an example.
And also, you're creating work, right? Like, because you worked with Kente weavers to make that. You're also impacting the supply chain, which opens doors also for future generations.
Exactly. And that's like, there's so many axes in which change has to happen. And I think the one message that I want to deliver, it doesn't happen in singular form, right?
That's right.
It's all the way down to the ecosystem, like Eve Kamara from Africa. My whole styling team is from Africa. Like, the diaspora, the film director, an amazing trans director, as well as Kai, the first Black trans model in a Louis Vuitton show. Like, to me, look at the fashion industry as a whole. Look at what's actually changed, and like, what glaring examples do we have for an eye towards sustainable diversity in terms of Black representation and the issues table? And so for me, it's like, I'm awarded a unique privilege. I sit at these companies and I sit in these decisions to make change. And for me, that's it's important that it's visible. It's important that it's tabled. It's important that it's like said with conviction about what I represent and what I want to see the industry be.
And also, for those who don't know, Kente is a woven, incredibly wonderful fabric from Ghana that is typically worn by royals, and also on special occasions like weddings, funerals. And you obviously associate it with such a high-end brand. I feel like also kind of changes the narrative for people who don't know, right? Right. Yeah. And then also you gave it like a kind of slight casualness to it also with the hoodie. Can you speak, like, your kind of thought process?
That to me is like when, like, me and my friends will wear like suits to dinner, right? Like, this is 2020. It's like, I'm a relatively young designer. My contribution to the history of design isn't to do things of the past.
Right.
That's no new space. And literally, the mood board was like Skepta, hopping, or WizKid hopping on a private jet to Lagos and showing how Africa is young and exuberant and new, And so I was like, how would I wear it today?
Mm-hmm.
What's a look that, that's what fashion is for, is like, what's a look that doesn't exist that you can create that shows the future and potential? And I just kept thinking about this young generation that are professionals that come from and hold their heritage with them. They're not going to wear in a European suit or
Right.
wear like a European brand that doesn't sort of embody, because like, let's be honest, look at the alternatives. The alternatives are to wear a suit jacket. And I was like, let's, like, streetwear obviously is what they term, like the terminology that I don't subscribe to fully, but I understand the ecosystem. And I was like, these are new looks that feel like they relate to a new society of African pride, but also style, flair, like the glasses. And that literally, it was like me dreaming of the outfit that I want to wear when I go back, like hop on a flight and go back for Christmas. Like, that is so empowering. Like, and that's more empowering than style. It's more empowering than fashion or trend. It's like liberating to see that, like, oh, even in a brand on High Street, like the biggest brands in the world, I can find something that I identify with.
And do you imagine also people outside wearing something like that? Like in New Jersey or in Chicago?
Yeah, like, like when I go to like the Ghana festival, like this is as a teenager, I would go to these, like in like a convention center, my parents would be going to like these like Ghana like focused events. And I like, that was just sort of like, if those were if I was there today, this is what I would want to like. Let's mind you, it's like when I go into Louis Vuitton, like, I'm usually getting things that are just more generic, and I wanted to make something very specific. When people look at like tartan or plaid, right, like that's of a different type, but it's a cultural heritage that's sort of been, adopted as like a fashionably, like a print, right? And so we all know like what wax prints and what Kente cloth, but how come we can't go to stores and find that? Especially if you have an African designer, like, someone of that culture. Like, it's going to be hard to make an argument for me to not represent that on like a stage as big, like look at your previous point about how do we make sure Africa is not a trend and it kind of carries on? How do we get high street in places like Ghana, South Africa? How do we foster these communities so that like there's equality on that same stage? And it takes all of this. It takes representation. It takes a diverse approach, and then new things will come of it.
And also to your point about building that ecosystem, like you mentioned wax print, wax print, as we all know, is not really from here. I mean, Ghana, sorry, from on the continent. Like, it's owned mostly by the Dutch, or it's being imported, and it has a very long history with trade here. But, it's not always the most empowering thing because the money doesn't necessarily benefit people here, although it's considered kind of an African fabric because of historical context. Whereas Kente, each color has a significance. Each weave has a significance. Each weaver weaves differently. Each person is a person with like the story and a family. It's not a machine running it through. It's to be honored. And, I just love, like everyone can have their different opinion on like whatever, but I just love the fact that, what in the same way that people honor traditions that are coming from Europe, you have made a decision to honor your identity and your heritage, and not only honor, the crafts of your ancestors, but also create a space where hopefully you're building a sustainable income for all those people that eventually and currently will enter a more globally recognized supply chain as this being this incredibly important royal fabric that has impacted so many people, but is not always given its due. So I think it's great.
Yeah, it's like it's at every rung of the ladder, there needs to be action, right? From the bottom to the top. And if we, and again, it's the existential question. Do we want to see change? And with that change, what's different yesterday from today? And
That's right.
And it's like, it's as simple as that, like this is 2021. I personally can't have more conversations about change, like whether you're on Clubhouse, on Instagram with friends, because I've seen just to be honest, I've seen people get tired. I see people just go back to Instagram. I see a lot of people vocal, but I see reasons why not to do something, but what I want to see is change. What I want to see is diversity, because we know what non-diversity looks like. We know what covers of magazines. We know what stylist credits. We know what fabrics. We know what models. We know, that's our industry. And I think 2020 was the year of reckoning. It's like how far off base things are. And, I use my platform to table these things, so that there can be discussion, there can be action, there can be resources, ultimately representation.
And it's the collective action, for those who feel dissuaded or who don't feel like their actions make a difference. It's the collective action, right? You made an intentional choice. You made your choice. Some people make a choice to do nothing, and that's their choice. But, even if it's a small thing, everybody's collective action moves the needle forward. And with that being said, I believe I'm meant to introduce two students that wanted to ask you a question. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce Amanda and Cece. Would you like to join us on the stage? Hi, Amanda.
Hey, how's it going?
Hi. Good. I hope everyone's doing well.
Yes. So starting, I'm just going in order of who I see on stage. So sorry, but I see Cece first. So Cece, would you like to introduce yourself and ask your question?
Sure. I'm Cecilia Karen. I go by Cece. I was born in the Congo, and I've lived in about 5 different countries: Ghana, Nigeria, Kenya, South Africa. So we traveled a bit. And I'm 23. I'm a student, and I work full-time as a copywriter, and I'm just an enthusiastic storyteller. So this has been an amazing platform to learn from and hear about. I don't know if you want me to go straight into my question or just let Amanda herself.
Go to your question.
Okay, awesome. So what's one thing you wished someone had told you about going into the industry that you probably discovered much later? Because I know a lot of us are looking at these things as what have you discovered that you wish someone had told you earlier?
I wish so. No, that's such a great question, because that's literally what I think about every day. Because what I had in my brain is literally what helped stop me from developing as far as I did. And the key thing is that, you always hear these things like there are no rules, right? But we know there are some rules. There's socially accepted norms, right? What should a fashion show look like? What should the models look like? And all these sorts of things. And the message I would deliver to answer your question is that those rules aren't fact. And almost the first person to break those norms becomes the new archetype. And to note that those rules always change. And that's our role as a younger generation entering in an industry. Our job is to evolve it, even though it might not be popular opinion, even though you might feel like it's risky and it might lose your business, or you might not be in Vogue magazine or whatever the cool thing you're striving for. But ultimately it's challenge yourself to sort of find a norm to break. That will make a name for yourself.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
That's really good advice. I was taking.
Sure.
Amanda, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, as Abrima said, my name is Amanda. I'm 23 years old, but I'm also originally from Tanzania. And but I currently live in the DMV. And my goal is to bring East African artists and creatives to the world stage. So my question for you is, because we learned from other fashion leaders just how hard, like how many hurdles that you have to get through in the fashion industry and just Western creative spaces. My question for you is, like, what type of mindset or like mentality or attitude did you have to set for yourself in order to get to the place that you are today?
Yeah, the mindset is key, right? And like it's sort of like a mountain, right? Like an oxygen. The higher you go up, the less oxygen there is there. And the important part of that narrative is, if you mentally know that there's going to be less oxygen, you can account for that. But if you ignore that, then you realize that you might be overcome with like being surprised and not dealing with it. Like your mind is like super important to it. It's just like Abrima was talking about. Like, I have a choice. I could be a designer that sort of stays middle of the road, does European style clothes, doesn't represent where I'm from. I might be a little bit less successful, but I would still be successful and I would be comfortable, right? But if I'm like, hey, there's not enough, I don't see enough African designers from Ghanaian descent or whatever. I want to stand for something. I know by standing for something, it's going to make someone automatically upset. Like, we know that as Black people, you know, so it's like, I have a choice and I know there's less oxygen up there, but do I want my career to stand for something? And sort of, when you pick up a history book in 30 years, can you look and say like, man, like, what happened in fashion? There's Kente cloth on a runway. And then they look on the page before and they say in 2020, a man was killed and there was all these uprisings. And they're like, oh, this person was awake. Then it's like, what are we doing? We're not just in fashion. We're telling a human history story. You know, we're writing in history books that kids will learn from. And what's wrong with the history books of today? Complete parts are erased. And that's where fashion doesn't become just something cool. Like Abrima opened up this whole thing. She talked about the history. And just because we have the internet doesn't mean that we're devoid of like historical events. And that's what makes me empowered and excited. It's like we can be into art and they're political. We can be into, they're opening roads and giving opportunity. We can be into music and it's a part of our celebration song or part of our resistance. And so, yeah, just oxygen. Realize that the further you go, there's going to be more trials and tribulations. It doesn't get easier. But once you know that, your brain can sort of withstand that energy.
Thank you. That was great.
That was so good that I was literally wrote that down.
I was just freestyling.
The higher you go, the less oxygen you have left. That was, I mean, I don't know who's listening right now or who's listening later. Gotta write that down because that is so unbelievably real. And I'm gonna add one little thing, even though I know nobody asked me, and that's fine. One little thing. No, the thing that I learned, which I'm just spinning off of what Virgil just said in the time I've been doing things, and especially in conversations around Africa and working on you both lived there, but also doing the work there, and you know, because you lived there. And I'm always like looking to see if the lights are going to go out, or I'm just like, I'm sweating a little bit, but I'm like, we're good. Kind of front like it's not like, I don't know what could happen, but that's cool. We're good right now. But what I wanted to say is like, I had to learn to forgive myself, right? Because I open up with these crazy ambitions of things that I want to do. And I had to learn to say it's okay. Like this has been going on for hundreds of years, it's going to go on for another hundreds of years. I'm like a piece of a puzzle, but I'm not, like Virgil said, there's a lot of people in this game right now. And there will be more, you're in it, and learning to forgive myself. And I think that's very much tied to what Virgil just said, because especially the more you're growing, the more you have to make peace with yourself and make sure your mind is balanced, and with your integrity and your authenticity and where you want to go. But anyway, this is about you guys. You guys are incredible. They told me to say, Abrima, please thank Amanda and Cece. We're going to pull you down now. So, blessings. Thank you.
Yeah.
Virgil, you're the best, at least in my opinion, and I think for Endeavor Impact. Are there any final words you want to say? Thank you so much for your time. Thanks for your contribution.
No, final words are only to support the work that you're doing, because I see you like across different platforms, like not only doing the work, but doing it with style and grace. And that inspires me to sort of like continue on, you know. And I think the last message is that, like, you know, this year is for our making, right? You know, like we saw what 2020 brings to our mood, our sentiment, and like, you know, just like the disparities that are awarded. So I just sort of preach and sort of lead by example, lead by doing. It's like every day is as good as any other day to see change. So like, I'm glad that we used the last hour and we're actively doing it. Like this next hour, I hope to be as functional and as progressive as the conversation we just had. And if you keep that mentality, then you don't have to worry about seeing change in your lifetime, because it's definitely going to happen. It's only how it happens is the question.
I love it. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you.
Thank you.
And all the students, have a wonderful rest of the day.
Cool. Take care.
Take care.